A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. I'd like to greet you all in the language of peace and paradise, the language of our mothers and forefathers, with the greeting of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And thank you all for taking the time out to join us on the BBIB platform, BBIB Center for Black British Islamic Bureau. Today we will be discussing gender justice, a Black Muslim experience. I'm joined by Sister Sakina Pilgrim and also Brother Mamadou Tal, and we'll start the main conversation really shortly. And I must admit, I'm looking forward to hearing from both of the brother and the sister in terms of perspective analysis. And we got really something really interesting to chop up, but I just wanted to outline extremely briefly who BBIB is. So we're a collection of organizations that came together following the death of George Floyd. And it was just triggered. There was something in the psyche, something in the public domain, but us as Muslims saying that there is no racism in Islam, but recognizing that as well as there being racism, anti-Black racism in particular in mainstream society, there is anti-Black racism in the Muslim community. So we thought, yeah, it's one thing cleaning up somebody else's house, but a little bit of house cleaning would be in order. So part of our role is to highlight and challenge anti-Black racism in Muslim spaces. And that could be by way of dialogue, by way of education and offering training to more mainstream organizations, or in worst case scenarios, but we are prepared to even take legal redress. Our other role is to repair and present a new healthy image of Black Muslims within the UK context and work towards gender inclusivity. So I guess that last, gender inclusivity, is right in line with today's conversation, which is, as I mentioned, gender justice, a Black Muslim experience. And we know there are some problematics with even the term Black Muslim community or even the term Black. And I'm really happy that we can discuss that, because there are limitations of language, and I don't think we should necessarily feel compelled to sweep over these complexities. That they all form part of the conversation, and they need, some terminology need explanation and clarification. So I think that's all in order. But I think that's as much intro as I'd like to do now. Apart from introducing myself as Bilal Alihu, many of you know me, and some of you may have seen me before. So I am one of the members of the BBIB, and I wouldn't say I drew the short straw. I'm going to stick with, it's an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be able to interview or conversate with two very well-known individuals in the Muslim community. Where do I start? I thought, reading your bio, both of your bios online, or information about your life, I thought there's nothing more appropriate than asking you to introduce yourself. And as they say, ladies first. So I know Sister Sakina, you're a poet and a writer, but how would you describe yourself in terms of what it is you do? Who are you and what do you do?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As-salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I just want to say I'm really honored and happy to be here and part of this conversation. I describe myself, I guess I'm a poet, I'm a writer, I'm a workshop facilitator, I'm a creative writing and poetry workshop facilitator. I'm also currently doing my master's in creative writing for therapeutic purposes. And my field of research is the healing potential of Sufi poetry, particularly looking at the West African tradition of qasidas, particularly Senegal. So I guess that's who I am. I guess I would say that I'm an educator as well. That's it really. I think that's how I would describe myself.
All right. Well, I'll be coming back to you, sis. I'll be coming back to you, but thank you for that. Brother Mamadou Tal, I know that you've got a history in being involved in politics, but you may have a more, I may have an old kind of like a kind of old appraisal of what it is you do. So how would you describe who you are and what it is that you do?
It's one of those questions, when you ask who you are, you're always like, oh crap, I don't know who I am. So I've got a background in law, but I'm also I study Islamic law as well at Azhar Mosque and amongst other teachers across the world. But my main focus now is kind of like social activism, and particularly I have an interest in the Black radical tradition. but also I like to put the Islamic paradigm in conversation with Black radical tradition. So my kind of, if it sounds a very grandiose claim, but I'm kind of exploring, like right now, my work is kind of geared towards where do we as Black people kind of locate liberation? Because I don't think liberation will be solely found in the political or solely found in the economical. It also needs to be found in the spiritual and the ontological. So that's like my work right now. So everything I do is centered around that, but that all that manifests itself in a political education for people.
Okay, so no pressure then. You mentioned the word grounded, but no pressure. You do that. The world is your oyster, brother. Your world is your oyster, young brother. The world is your oyster. So I've used the term Black Muslim community. You've used the term Black also, and I spoke to Sister Sakina in the brief, and I wanted to throw this out about even. Let's start even from there, the kind of like use of the term Black Muslim community, because from my perspective is that it is not a geographical phenomenon, but more it's an ideological phenomenon in the sense of, we know in the Pakistani section of the Muslim community, there may be people who live from the same ethnic group in like physically close locales, and the same for Middle Eastern, Iraqi, whatever the nationality is, sections of the UK Muslim community. But when we talk about the Black Muslim community, sometimes people use the word revert interchangeably. Some people find that word offensive because they say, well, I was born a Muslim, or whatever the case may be. But there's all this kind of like, all these questions that come out of that. But I'd like to get your thoughts. I think I'll jump with the sister first about the idea of using the term Black Muslim community. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I guess in preparation for today, that was the conversation that's been in my mind a lot, actually, like the Black Muslim community in Britain. What does that mean? What does that look like? What has my experience been with that community, or with the concept of that community? And I think even before I talk, I guess I do want to say that when talking about my experience as a Black Muslim woman in Britain, I know that the framework that I exist in has been probably a lot different than many Black Muslim women. For example, I came into the community as an artist, like from the beginning. So quite rapidly, we were finding ourselves on stages and in places that maybe a lot of Black Muslim women would not have had access to so early in their Islamic journey. And in sometimes being amongst communities that would praise and elevate you because of your art, that maybe if we were not artists, we may not have had the same welcome, let's say. I'm also very aware of, and we can talk about it later, even things to do with like colorism and color dynamics, and what it means to be like a lighter skinned Black woman in the context of a wider Black community, and the privileges and the access.
I've got that in my notes. I've got colorism in my notes.
Yeah, so
we'll get there.
And so it's important for me to make mention of that before I even speak, because the things I'll speak on will probably be different for so many people. So what I'll say so personally, as a human, I'm not keen on the term Black as an identifier for myself. Like, I understand it in the context of community and of grouping, but the idea of Black as an identity, for me, I find it way too vague. It doesn't locate me anywhere. There's no food that's associated with what it means to be Black. There's no particular music, there's no particular cuisine specifically. If we're talking about the umbrella of Blackness, yeah, but as an individual, when you say a Pakistani person or an Iraqi person, you're putting them in a particular location. When you say Black, what does that even mean? It brings up so many connotations. And I also think of the concept of Blackness as a construction that our ancestors 400-500 years ago may not necessarily have identified themselves based on color. It would have been based on maybe tribe or based on location. So I don't really like the term, if I'm honest with you, but I understand that we need it for unity, right? So when we're talking about globally, like, we're a Black people, we're African people, but I was raised very much, I come from a Rasta background, first of all. So I was rooted Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. So I was raised with a very Pan-African global identity. So I guess we always just identified ourselves as African. You know what I mean? It was an African identity that we were maybe potentially romanticizing, because at the time we had never even been to Africa, but Africa was the goal. It wasn't, and yeah, we would use the term Black, but as I've gotten older, I'm like, what does that word even mean? You know what I mean? And there are even certain people that maybe wouldn't even have used the term Black, certain immigrant communities, until they came to England. But back home, they're Nigerian, or they're Ghanaian, or we're Yoruba, or we're this, or we're that. So like I said, I understand it for the sake of unity. But I just feel, I guess I kind of witness it as a construction that was constructed as a response to whiteness. Like, whiteness is this and blackness is this. And I don't really like having an identity that's a response to anything. Like, I don't want to be black because I'm not white. You know what I'm trying to say? What are we inherently? So that in and of itself is already a conversation. And when you talk about the Black Muslim community in England, well, I spent a lot of time when I first became a Muslim in a very musical community, right? We spoke about, it was a hip hop community. So we were majority Black, but what united us was the fact that we were artists, you know. Then I spent a lot of time in the Somali community because of where I lived. So it was majority Black, but it wasn't necessarily like we were together because of our ethnicity or because of our color or anything like that. And then there's the other addition, which is my connection to the West African community, and having lived in Senegal and learned most of my Islam comes from that tradition. But when I'm there, I'm a white woman. Do you see what I mean? So it's also got its own complexities that I think sometimes trying to squash it into under one umbrella can be difficult, because
definitely. Just to jump in, it definitely is difficult.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that, because even the idea of blackness, for example, depending on what culture you're in, people define themselves differently. So some people will say, we'll look at them as Londoners and people of African Caribbean descent, and then say, yeah, he's a black guy. They go, no, I'm not black, I'm Latino. Or somewhere else in the world, they say, no, I'm not black, I'm Arab. But for our definition, for our working definition, and I guess all of those are right. It's just that everybody has their own definition. And maybe something about, like you said, it's a response to, because even African, the term African and Pan-Africanism was created. Well, Pan-Africanism was, created in the West Indies, for want of a better term, and kind of North America, to respond to like institutional and structural white racism, anti-black racism. So you raise many interesting points, many interesting points. So just only because of time, I'm gonna get the most out of you guys. So I'm gonna get Brother Mamadou to jump in.
I mean, I think what Tina says is very interesting, actually, and it's something I've trying to understand more, because I think when we try to define what blackness is, it throws up a whole host of questions. Because when we think about it, as Kina rightly says, if you look at pre-colonial Africa, there's no such thing as this construction of black. It was, you were Yoruba, you were Mandinka, you were Hausa, you're Jola, you're Fula. And then what you find is that, so I always say, people say to me, and in the work that I do, I say the concept of race itself hurts black people the most. It doesn't hurt anyone else but black people the most, because the concept of the construction of race in and of itself is hierarchical in nature. So like the emergence of Europeans in the soil. And again, I don't like the fact that white people are afforded to their cultures individually. White people are afforded their identities individually. But now I must be collapsed into one homogenous group of black that's like unidentified, unspecified, and unrestricted. But at the same time, it's like you as Ken Wright said as well, you kind of traverse that kind of thin line between, yes, I want to be able to be a part of the collective and hold my identity and my cultural identity, but at the same time, I do probably, and again, I know this is very Western specific, I think there is a specific Western black experience, because I feel the structures in the West were born out of a white supremacy. So because of the structures in the West were born out of white supremacy, we are now going to be victims of that violence the most. And again, that's not exclusive to like dark-skinned people, that's black as however they're black identified. But then again, it goes into a wider question, because in the UK now, black wouldn't just be, and we know that in the 80s and 70s, political blackness was a thing. And that was where South Asian communities got together and were banded under the banner of political blackness. The British Black Panthers had so many South Asians in there. The Southall bus boycott, so many Asian women were involved in that. And they were black. So the question does remain now, like, how do we now forge a new identity out of what we see in the world today and what we experience? Because I do recognize Toni Morris, and I think the problem is, as Sakina said as well, we're always responding. And I think as black people, it's so frustrating because, like, as Toni Morrison says, the kind of function of racism is to tire you out. Because they say you don't have culture, you write 10,000 books, you have culture. They say you don't have good food, you write cookbooks. They say you don't have music, you prove it. And I think, hang on a minute, when do we just get to be? When do you have to, rather than a state of reacting, why can't we just be in a state of being? So that's like a grandiose kind of talk about blackness. But as a Black Muslim community, and I want to say on the record, I feel like yes, anti-Blackness does exist in Muslim communities. Absolutely, I've received that. Prejudice exists in every single community, absolutely. But what I would say is that I just think it's such a shame that we have to understand that anti-Blackness is just an iteration of white supremacy. That's all it is. It's an iteration of white supremacy. So I'll have conversations in that we tackle white supremacy than rather than what we see today is like, yeah, okay, if you're not racist, why don't you let your daughter marry a Black? Who cares? Like, who cares about like marriage? Is like the least of the worries for me anyway. As a Black man, I have no desire to be in the family that doesn't accept me anyway. I have no desire to be in that family anyway. So what I would like a conversation that when we're talking about anti-Blackness, speak about it in terms of structures and systems, not on the interpersonal. Interpersonal, we can deal with that. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, so you've raised a point about, I guess, like, I'm going to draw the inference that there's something to do with institutional anti-Blackness in the Muslim community, because is that then we're talking about at board level or what is taught, or even the narrative, how the narrative is shaped. So just a simple example is that we know that there are African or Black people that are part of Ahlul Bayt or part of the righteous Sahaba, but for some reason Bilal, who is a nobleman in his own right, but the narrative of the slave and the synonym of the slave, and to prove that Islam isn't racist, we'll pull Bilal out as the one kind of Black guy that had walked into the wrong prayer room kind of narrative, when they were clearly people of high aristocracy or noble lineage, and like that you could use as an example, but they're kind of written out or not written out, or their identity becomes nebulous and vague as just Arab, so I guess I don't know if that's another conversation or part of the same conversation, but definitely we'll look at institutional anti-Blackness in the Muslim community. I want us to come back to Sister Sakina and talk about the Black Muslim woman's experience in the UK in terms of what you possibly, because I'm aware that you're not a self-appointed spokesperson or you can't speak on everybody's experience, but just sort of there's dynamics that you would be aware of, narratives that you'd be aware of that you could possibly share in terms of maybe like historically, and historically doesn't mean 25 years ago, it could even mean 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but kind of from a historical perspective, what would you say has been the story or the common themes about Black Muslim sisters in the UK?
Yeah, what I want to say quickly just before I go into that is actually, as Brother Mohammed was talking, it made me think that maybe a preferable concept as opposed to like the Black Muslim community might be the Black Muslim experience, because I think that kind of shifts it. Like what we go through is the same, I mean, Mamadou, he's Gambian, he could easily be Jamaican, like it doesn't matter, because when he's out on the street, the experience of him is the same, but when he goes home, there's a completely different framework. And I think that was what I was trying to lean to before about the differences. I might look, most people think I'm from East Africa, but my framework and the framework of someone from Somalia, for example, the Eritrea, is completely different. And I think that was really what my kind of point was, is that the experience, trying to clump it, or like you said, like almost, it's like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup, basically, by trying to put the Black community into one. But the Black experience or the Black Muslim experience, we can all share in that conversation, no matter your complexion or what have you, that we all know what that feels like. I guess I would say regarding the Black Muslim female experience, it's interesting. I remember someone said to me, and it was probably one of the funniest things anyone's ever said to me. She said, I feel very sorry for you. She said, because you're Black, you're Muslim, and you're a woman. It was a white woman who said this. And she had the purest of intentions, but for her, she was thinking, wow, the weight of all of those experiences. I don't even know how you are able to even bear that. You know what I mean? And I just thought it was funny, because to me, I see myself as the most magical entity on earth. Like for me, there's nothing more beautiful than a Black woman. There's nothing more beautiful than a woman who follows the way of Allah. And there's just nothing more beautiful than Blackness, in my opinion. So when she said that, it was almost like, Rare, that's how you see me. That's not how I see me. Like I see myself as like a Black unicorn, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I think there's something though in when people have low expectation for you, that it gives you a certain sense of freedom. And I kind of like that no one's watching me. I think it's a little bit like how I feel about, in some ways, the kind of way in which the Muslim community doesn't really pay much attention to the Islamic experience in West Africa. Part of me kind of likes that. Like, don't worry about us. Like, we're good over here. Look at your own stuff. Like, we got our own traditions that are being preserved in such a beautiful way. It almost feels like a pearl in an oyster to me. So for me as a Black Muslim woman, how I identify myself is with absolute, I think it's the best. I don't think there's anything more beautiful. However, within a wider framework, obviously people see us as, you know, some, like, outside of the Muslim community, there is this whole idea that, like, we must be uneducated, that we must be oppressed, that we are from the lower rungs of society. I remember once I was at an event and someone was talking about this very elite event she had been to, and she was like almost feeling sorry for me. She kind of was like, oh, I'm really sorry, you know, this isn't somewhere you've probably ever been to. And I was thinking, bruv, like, I could be the daughter of the Emir of Kano. Like, you don't even know me. Like, I could be the Queen of Zanzibar, you know, like, you have no idea, but you just assumed because I'm a Black woman with a headscarf on that I must be from a particular trajectory in life. I must be in a particular, like, location. Small things like when I got married, I remember I went to sign up at the local GP, and the woman behind the receptionist was like, spoke very slowly, "Can you speak English?" And I'm like, I just got an honors degree in English literature, you know, like, so all these assumptions, I think, that come from what it means to look like this. An assumption that you come from me, an assumption that I come from a refugee background, for example. So there are many things that that the experience comes with, as well as, I think, you know, you have talking about marriage. Mohammed spoke about marriage, and what he said is exactly my feelings. Like, anytime there's a conversation about race, you always hear, particularly a lot of brothers, like, if I wanted to marry your daughter, you know, oh, Pakistani uncle, you would say no. You know what I'm saying? And my thing is, like, why is that always brought up? You know, why is it the Black men, whenever it's Black Muslim men, whenever they're talking about this problem, they always refer to wanting to marry the local imam's wife? And so what I definitely...
His daughter or his wife?
Sorry, his wife. I mean, his daughter.
Because that would be a problem. That would be a problem.
But this idea actually, and so I see it with a lot of the women of my friends and the women of my community, Black women, that they do struggle to get married. You know what I mean? They do struggle to get married. And I see a lot of our sisters, you know, a lot of sisters I know, maybe they might marry African-American men, and if people that will marry, you know, continental African men, for example. So, you know, that's definitely an issue. And it's not just an issue of, you know, other men or men from other cultures not wanting to marry us, but also the issue that our own men don't necessarily want to. And
that's something pretty deep that I hope we get time to come back to and look at in a bit more detail, because that is something that's a theme that keeps coming up in different circles that I'm aware of.
Absolutely. And I contemplate it sometimes, like, I wonder what it is, you know what I mean? I wonder if we're looking at, like, for example, within the context of people that embrace Islam, like a Caribbean guy who embraces Islam, Caribbean woman, maybe in my mind, I'm trying to understand, I'm like, maybe the Caribbean brother might prefer someone from another Muslim background, because maybe he wants his children to be raised within that framework. Like, I'm like trying to rationalize, is it that you want to marry someone who's maybe Somali or Moroccan, or, you know what I'm saying, from South Asia, because you want that framework for your offspring? Or is it potentially because maybe the woman represents a life that you've left behind, and maybe you're afraid that if you guys, you know, that it might be thin, like maybe she might go back. I don't know what it is. Or is it simply, which I think it is, it's because there is very low love of self, you know what I'm saying? And the ones who tend to suffer the most by way of that is the women, you know? I don't even need to talk about that. I'm sure we can all talk, you know, we could all just understand the kind of intersections of, you know, racism, feminism, you know, classism, gender, all of these things that exist within the Muslim women's experience. But I guess for myself, the women that I'm around are so empowered by Allah, you know what I'm saying? Are so empowered by the love of Rasulullah, that I don't necessarily see that we see ourselves as oppressed. There's oppressive systems, but I feel like the women that I'm around, that's how it is. And then to add, but I'm not going to go into it, for myself and the community that I'm connected to, we're also now connected to a very deep, strong tradition of female West African shuyukh and scholarship, which has given us a whole other level of confidence of, like, I noticed that people from Pakistani backgrounds or Arab backgrounds, they too are running to understand, like, what is this tradition of female scholarship that exists in West Africa? Innately Islamic, no need to be Muslim feminist, no need for these other like additional terms alongside our Islamic femininity. So that's a whole other thing that we are drawing from as well, you know what I mean? So yeah, I guess that's my kind of feeling.
My response to some of what you mentioned, or I can't help but thinking as a therapist, just thinking like clinically, like there is internal, post-colonial, post-transatlantic slave trade. There is anti-blackness, not anti-blackness, but colorism within the Black community. I almost found it comical when recently Oprah interviewed Meghan Markle, and there was a conversation about, and I kind of respect Oprah as a good actress, generally speaking, but when Meghan Markle mentioned that somebody asked how dark the baby's gonna be, and she gasped, and Oprah gasped, I was like, that gasp was in poor taste. You're an African-American woman, man. I'm not throwing nobody under the bus, but let's be real. We even have those conversations amongst ourselves as Black people when the man is dark, very light-skinned and has soft hair, and the woman is very dark, or vice versa, or whatever. People say things like that. So how she was so astonished, I found that quite interesting. And to connect it to the issue of sometimes brothers not wanting to marry sisters from their own ethnicity, for want of a better term, I think it is possibly an aspect of it, because it can't speak to everybody's experience, but some of it is related to colorism. I guess we can't really get away from that. I mean, we spoke with Professor Danjuma last month, and he mentioned about when he was working in a particular mosque, and brothers would approach him for marriage, and they would say they're looking, Caribbean brothers might be looking for a, they're looking for a Moroccan wife or Iraqi wife. What's going on? What's with that? I'm paraphrasing now, and be like, for Arabia, it's Arabic. And he said, oh no, we got some good women from Sudan here that's not married and stuff like that. Very nice dark-skinned women, and they would freeze. But he was saying he didn't really have the women, but he just wanted to kind of test the psyche out. And so clearly there's something else going on apart from Arabic. But as I said, only because of time, I'm going to move on to Brother Mamadou to maybe speak about your perspective as a man, but being in the Muslim community and having a perception or a view of how you see the sisters historically. Yeah. And I said not ancient history, but any history that's relevant to your story.
No, it's very interesting because so I'm 27. I'm going out on a limb. Bilal, you look very young, but I'm going to say I think I'm the youngest on the panel today.
I'll give you that one.
So, I mean, right now, what we see right now is, if you're on social media, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, there is, like, my generation, there is beef right now between Black women and Black men. Yeah, Black women are just tearing Black men, and as I say, they're tearing their singlets, and many times it's quite justified. Yeah, and likewise, Black men are responding in certain ways as well. But then, I just find the conversations to be kind of like they're not really progressing anything. It's like, okay, yes, but this is a problem. I think it's very important when Ina said as well that she feels she doesn't see herself as oppressed. Because I find that when you begin to make like your trauma, your politics, and again, there is a place for healing. There's a place for healing. There's a place for speaking about like your problems amongst people in a safe space, but that shouldn't be the guiding principle. Because things like colorism, featureism, texturism are what? They're eugenics. That's a form of eugenics. It's another iteration of anti-white supremacy. And when I hear Black women say, Black men are our oppressors, I don't believe that's the case. I think the oppressor is the oppressive systems. I don't think Black men have the political power to be the oppressor. That's not saying they can't act oppressive, but they're not the oppressor. I think it's very important that we frame the discussion. That's what I'm trying to do constantly. Okay, I hear what people are saying, of course, but let's direct that energy somewhere more useful. So what I was doing right now, and I recommend everyone do this, just read Bell Hooks. So Bell Hooks speaks about, in We Real Cool, Black Men and Masculinity, she speaks about what goes into socialization of Black men. Because because the question must remain, if so many Black women have a negative experience of Black men, and this is before, forget it being Muslim, so many Black women have an experience of a Black man called me a name, a Black man insulted the way I look, a Black man did this, and these are true experiences. The question then must be asked, what goes into socialization of Black men to make them act this way? And no one's asking that question. So again, unless we tackle that question, we're going to keep reproducing white supremacy. We're going to keep producing eugenics and these race essentialist arguments. So as for the community now, as a marriage as well, I hate the topic of marriage, but I kind of feel like
it's a cringeworthy topic in some respects. The way I heard you mention it earlier, like, why do people just jump from, can I marry your daughter? Like, it is slightly cringeworthy, but there is still something that's relevant in the sense it is highlighting some sort of prejudice.
Yeah, from the black men, 100%. And I've seen it. I've seen like black men particularly who I know, they will like bend over backwards to marry into a non-black family. And whilst they're being insulted, literally, they're being, and again, that's what Sakina says, it comes from a place of not loving yourself. And I feel like what kind of, and to be fair, maybe even myself, I might have fallen victim to that when I was younger, because I remember my socialization growing up was I watched Christina Milian, Aaliyah, Beyonce, Kelis. These are the pinnacles of beauty and if you're lucky, you might have got a Gabrielle Union every now and again. I mean, so these are the pinnacles of beauty for me growing up. So naturally, when I was younger, going into spaces of trying to think of like, work out sexuality, things like this, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what I find beautiful. And they say it's just a preference. No one is objectively beautiful. What you find beautiful is socialization. You've been socialized into believing what is beautiful. So and my turning point for me, if I'm honest, was Malcolm X, who taught you to hate yourself. That was like a turning point for me, because when he said, who taught you to hate the color of your skin, texture of your hair, the shape of your nose? Why did I associate? And I might not have been conscious of that, I never verbalized it, but deep down I know I found certain things, certain quote unquote African features to be unattractive. But again, we have to be honest with ourselves as black men and hopefully go through that process of unlearning. And not for the fact of just to marry a black woman, but for the fact that first and foremost, you see yourself of worthy. You don't project unworthiness onto other black men who look like you. That's what, because that results in what? Why is it like you find black men on the road, young guys, teenagers, would rather like do a madness to other black boys, but wouldn't touch a white person? Because they deem the white person's life less than their own life. They deem white person's life more worthy than their own. So I think, my thing is, again, colorism, these things are so deep, but they go beyond just like marriage topics. It goes to beyond like gang crime is involved in it. How you see yourself, how you then project onto your mothers, how you then end up reproducing white supremacy and eugenics. So I think that's why I'm just trying to have that conversation more. And within that conversation, we can have the one about marriage, of course, but let's not focus just be why are black men not marrying black women. The conversation should be what goes into socialization of black men to see themselves as less than.
No, absolutely. I have to agree with it 100%. I think that the phrase you mentioned about the gangs, it reminded me of a saying from a deceased PhD, Mohammed, that systematic, automatic remote control, that people act out in a certain way because of the socialization process. And there's a really interesting piece by Amos Wilson as well, Black on Black Violence and Self-Destruction in the Service of White Supremacy, Psychodynamics. Is a really, really, really powerful read, because it talks about the systems. There's this behavior that we see, but there's these systems in place that keep them replicating, those behaviors being replicated generation after generation. And I think that's what we have to, I guess, try to disrupt. And even this conversation is part of trying to disrupt that matrix, trying to break the signal or put something else out there. We might not be able to get to all of the answers, but maybe we can raise enough talking points that people can see this, and it can get people reflecting a little bit more critically around these issues in a deeper way. Sister Sakina, I want to jump back to yourself and ask you about where do you think we are with respect to the gender dynamics in the Muslim community, just in terms of gender and females being rightly empowered, disempowered, not really wanting to be empowered, quite happy where they are, or are we missing something as men? Because I get the impression that there's a kind of Western agenda, and it's just a way to sort of try to attack the Islamic tradition by always bringing up women's position and women's social standing and why they're female imams. And every so often somebody makes a fairly poor documentary, but it's on a probably mainstream station, so it'll get a certain amount of interest, about sexism in the Muslim community. 10, 15 years ago, it was on the Killings was doing the lap and things of that nature. Then we had a radicalism that's kind of got a bit, I don't know if it really does what it does in the press like it used to. Every now and then we have something, but it seems like as there's a gender war in society at the moment, I would say, definitely in the Black community, although hopefully it's coming to the end. But now the part of that gender war and that whole feminist and ultra left wing and this talk about Black Lives Matter, the movement, and they got an agenda to kind of remove men from the process. And so there's a lot going on with this radical feminism and things of that nature. What's your thoughts about where Muslim women are in the Muslim community?
So really, really good question. Again, before I go into it, I just kind of want to respond to what Mamadou said, because I think you made some like really, really interesting points and articulated it in, I think, a really important way, which is a lot to do with the trauma that we bring into politics, you know, and I think that's such a powerful thing, particularly when it comes to women. And I think that sometimes and the idea that what are we doing here? Because like I said, I come from that Rasta background. I come from these conversations about race, about Blackness, about identity, like breastfed on those kind of conversations. And after a while, as a teenager growing up, I'm like, why are we still having the same type of conversation? Like, why has the conversation every single bloody Kwanzaa event? They say, look, pan, you know, the Indian man, I want to set up him shop, the man, I want to do this. And it's the same thing every time. And I'm like, are we going to say exactly the same thing? Are we always going to look outside of ourselves for the answers and also not look at what needs to be healed within our own selves? And I think what Mamadou is pointing to is this idea, like, yeah, we can look outside of it and see frameworks and structures that exist, but until we are honest with ourselves as a community about what we need to address, we're not going to move anywhere. I think what you mentioned about, you know, the socialization of Black men and what is it that has led for this? It's also the same for Black women, because the same Black women that are going to be talking about how Black men oppress them have got hair that doesn't come from their own head. You know what I'm saying? They're wearing clothes that are not anything to do with their own inherent tradition, whether they know of it or not. Like oftentimes we probably as women may have potentially internalized it the most, you know what I'm saying, and don't even know how to honor ourselves and don't sometimes even know how to receive honor, because that's another thing. There's one thing about being honored, but someone might come and honor you, and if you're not ready to receive it, you don't even know how to accept it. You hear these conversations of Black women sometimes, like I've seen it on YouTube, like, oh, we just want like a road man, we want someone to be like, shut up, like do this and do that. They want to be rough, they want to be treated in a rough way. If a good guy comes along, they're like, oh, I'll eat him up, I'll chew him up. I don't want a guy like that. So what you're saying is that you don't even know how to receive honor, basically. You know what I'm saying?
Those kind of guys that treat women like that as a gentleman, they will destroy the relationship. Oftentimes they destroy the relationship because there's a script that I'm not worthy. The unconscious script is I'm not worthy. So when he treats them in a certain way, noble, like this is not for me. So I'm uncomfortable in this role. When you shout at me or have this threats of violence or aggression, as traumatic as it may be, it's predictable and it's what I'm used to. But when you put me in a new environment of honor and integrity, I'm freaked out. So I'm going to destroy this because I'm not worthy. I just want to throw that in because I'm working on a piece about
100%. And so even for me, like when we're talking, sometimes I'm hearing people talking about reparations for the Black community. No, get therapy for the Black community before we get reparations, because if we get that money, we won't even know what to do with it. We'll probably just use it to buy more hair pieces and, you know, imitate some other person from another culture. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think
we'll floss for a year, maybe, and it'll be a hell of a party, but it will come to an end, and it will.
Exactly, very quickly. I don't even for 3 months, money's gone. You know what I'm saying?
Money done.
Exactly. So I just kind of wanted to, I guess, to reflect that, like it's both of us. It's on both sides. Both sides of the coin actually have a lot of work regarding that. With regards to, like, I guess the role, like women and where it's going and all these different things, I very much believe that, like, not even believe, just fantasy believe, but inherently know with a knowing that every single answer that we need exists within the Quran and within the tradition of Rasulullah alayhi salam when it comes to how we need to exist in this world as women. I don't see personally that I need to look outside of my tradition to find answers. And I think that what's happening is because a large majority of Muslim women in this modern era don't have access to proper knowledge, don't have access to proper scholarship, don't have access to proper gatherings of knowledge. We don't even know our tradition. I remember I was interviewed, someone was interviewing me about Islamic feminism. I don't subscribe to the idea, because who can validate me more than Allah Ta'ala, who's already validated me in the Quran? Do you understand? He's already validated my soul. He's already validated my position and my experience. I don't need to go out of my tradition to find that validation as a woman. You know what I mean? It's to me, that's almost, particularly because when we look at, and again, I'm not a scholar on feminism, but when we look at the tradition of feminism initially, it wasn't designed with Black people in mind. It wasn't designed with me in mind. It was really about white middle class women retaliating against the same white supremacy that was oppressing me too, right?
Family argument. So it's basically a family argument.
Yeah, it's your business, you know what I'm saying? And I get it. Again, don't get me wrong. Like, I also understand why people are finding a vocabulary outside of our tradition for this. But again, it comes down to, in my opinion, you know, insecurity in what it means to even be a Muslim in the modern world. I think there are still many Muslims who hold this idea to, even though they might practice it, that this is an outdated way of life. Like, this is what we do at a particular time of the day or a particular, you know, day of the week, but it's not for everybody an inherent life code. You know what I'm saying? And I think if you know,
almost like we're reducing Islam to ceremony for burials and weddings and traditions and stuff like this, but but some people unconsciously or and no fault of their own, but necessarily maybe the miseducation of the Muslim world is
100%.
like we need to modernize and we need to have a reformation. You hear these, I'm progressive, I'm liberal, and you know, like I'm liberal Muslim, progressive Muslim, and a little bit troubling, but. And understandably, if you kind of step back and look at the bigger picture of what's been going on.
And again, don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with refreshing the deen. You know, we have this concept, I believe it's
Tajdid or something.
Yeah, exactly. That in every age, there's someone who comes to refresh, a fresh gaze. We should be constantly looking at our tradition and understanding it within the context, but we're not going to, like, you know, some European philosopher to try and get those answers. It's more
not
like,
to remove aspects of Islam that we find problematic vis-a-vis the modern world. Like, because it's uncomfortable, we want to remove those aspects of what we derived from the Quran, the Sunnah, and the classical scholars. Like, that's when I talk about reformation. I'm talking about in that context of people trying to reform.
Exactly. So again, I think that, you know, if I was to think about what is necessary, and when I think about the Muslim women that have empowered and inspired me throughout history, they're all women who strive by way of education. They are women who strive by way of their devotional practice as well, because I think there's a certain power that comes when you know that you're striving with Quran, that you're striving in your ibadah, that you're striving in your worship itself, because strength comes from that. There's a particular confidence that comes when you know that you're striving in the way that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has prescribed for you. I think it's important that women understand within a framework that, and it's, for me, I must say, sometimes the conversations about Muslim women in the Muslim community are like so dead. I don't even listen to them. This is a healthy conversation, because it's always like, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, mashallah, Aisha. It's the same for women.
Regurgitation.
But it's more than regurgitation, because what is happening is these only 4 women are being presented as this ideal that we're supposed to, that actually we're kind of shown that you'll never be them though. Like, you'll never quite be Aisha, you'll never be, so you kind of, it's almost like they're there, but you can't be them. So we'll create a narrative of honor for these women, but we don't honor the everyday Muslim woman who's going into the masjid. And that's the problem. If I'm putting Khadija up there, I'm saying it's okay to marry a woman in her 40s who's been divorced. It's okay to have your woman earn more P than you. It's okay, but we're not saying those things. We're putting these women up as almost like icons that are unreachable, and no one gives them the respect that, no one gives the women the respect that they would give those women. The same with, you know, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. Like, how many, if there was right now like 2 courses happening of 2 women, like a man and a woman giving a lecture about Ramadan, and the woman has studied 20 years in the desert, and the brother did 1 weekend course in some summer class in Medina al-Munawwara University, and they were both giving the same lecture, how many men would go to the females lecture? In reality, they'll go to the guy who's on a summer course in some, like,
and how many females would even go to the female sister, to the sisters lecture as well? Because there's that as well.
Which is a whole thing, right? And so this idea that, like, how do we honor the female scholarship of this day in reality, you know? So all of that to say that it's important, if we're going to be bringing up these names and bringing up these people, that we look at them as a role model that women too can aspire to be from amongst, you know what I'm saying? And I think, and if that's the case, then they should also be given that same level of honor. But I'm just of the opinion and this is just how I live my life as a Black person, as a Muslim, as a woman, that I need to do my own work. I can't expect anyone to honor me until I honor myself. I can't expect anyone to respect me until I respect myself. It's just how, if you go to a house that's well kept, and you go, you're not going to fling down your shoes and fling down your coat. You're going to put it neatly because the house is well kept. If you come to my house and my clothes are everywhere, you might just throw your stuff down too. It's just how it is. You know, it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you. That is, and that is actually backed by scientific research. That even they've done research to say that, for example, in more, let's say, affluent spaces, the council or the people who organize those spaces, they're very strict about graffiti and eradicating any rubbish or any dumping, flighting, whatever, because it would attract more. They've done clinical research, not clinical, but they've done scientific research on this. And they know, like in the hood, in the ghetto where people graffiti, they see graffiti, so they're more likely to graffiti in those areas. I think in Jamaica, they say "Dopping over to frighten." It's almost like you kind of carry out that thing, you know, like in that, because it's suitable for that space. But I guess something's evolved in the conversation, and it's been in my mind for a while, but I'm almost finding it verified in both of your remarks about that need for Muslim safe spaces, a Black Muslim safe space, and there's a difference between what informs a healing space, and this is like a non-judgmental space and a clinical space, and what drives ideology, or what drives protocol in a community, what drives procedure, and then two different things. And that we can't, like just with the Kwanzaa metaphor or the Kwanzaa analysis, you can't let the trauma lead all your ideas, because then you're in kind of reactionary mode. But there is a need for a safe space, a healing space that I feel that we have to, should I say, that we have to develop some of those in the community. Mamadou, I want to bring you in about your perspective on the system. Same question as I'd asked.
I think I totally resonate with what Sakina is saying. My only comment would be, I feel, first and foremost, the point about white feminism is spot on. Angela Davis says that if white feminism existed in the same way it did now, that as it did in slavery, the call would be to let white women own slaves too, as opposed to abolish, you know. And that's that real, because what is white feminism? White feminism they want to be more like white men. They don't want to, kind of disrupt the systems that of oppression. They want to be more like white men. So
it's not a fair distribution of wealth, resources, of opportunity for all. But you're saying it's like you guys have stolen the money and we want our half.
Yeah, that's it. You lot have power. We want to be more like you. We also want to oppress Black people as well. That is what white feminism is about. Hence why we do have amazing like Angela Davis and other amazing Black feminists who said, you know what, you lot are talking about, you lot more want to be like white men. We're saying, no, we want to disrupt the system completely. And I find that to be more in line with maybe like what Muslims should be upon as well. My only kind of comment as well would be, I do believe patriarchy does exist, and I think we've come across even patriarchal interpretations of Islam, for example, exist and they're widespread. Women can't travel alone, for example. And again, these rulings have a place and time, but we have to interrogate why those rulings came about in the first place. So when you hear super restrictive rules on women coming out of the British Raj in India and Pakistan, in India, of course, when you're under colonization, of course you're going to preserve what you have. That's totally understandable. Mm-hmm, but again, a reaction to colonization is different to a reaction to living in 21st century Britain, where women can own property, travel, educate herself, do everything of the above, but then she can't go to, if she goes 39 miles, it's okay, but if she goes 40, God's going to punish her for eternity. Like, it doesn't really, so I think those things we can interrogate. But what I would say as well, I think there has been a failing on scholarship from UK Muslims particularly, because I have people, I just full disclosure, I kind of flirt with a lot of Marxist traditions, a lot of like critical race theory, a lot of leftist politics. Like I find myself, in line with that, like anti-capitalist politics. And I get pushback as well from a lot of scholarship, from a lot of scholars saying, oh, but Marx has got, say it lightly, a complex relationship with religion. Feminism, how do you understand gender? Gender as well, or what's this non-binary stuff? Again, it's quite interesting. The concept of non-binary, by the way, I'm not saying it's Islamic, but it does exist in pre-colonial Africa. Like it's not a new concept. The concept of not having a genderless is not a new concept, by the way, yeah? So I understand that, but I'm not pushing that as Islamic, by the way, either. But my question to the scholars that have an issue, because the scholars say, oh, a lot of young activists, you lot are moving away from Islam. You lot are moving away from Islam. I don't believe that, but if that's the case, then my response would be, you as a scholar, why have you not put forward a framework that challenges wealth inequality, race inequality, and gender inequality based on Islamic principles? If you're going to say, don't become Marxist, don't become a critical race theorist, don't become a neoliberal feminist, fine. Because I believe you have good intentions. You worry about the theological ramifications of those theories.
So part one is good. Part one, don't become those things, is good. But the second part is missing. Is that what you?
Yeah, don't become those things. Don't become. Again, we all know Marxism has a very antagonistic relationship to religion. Anyway, I know that.
To put it politely, isn't it? Yeah.
Put it politely. Again, and however, I do recognize that, at the same time, I don't know, personally, I can take these critiques and not affect my faith. I can take a critique on capitalism and not let it affect my faith. But not everyone can do that. Fair enough. I'm more in the realm of academia, fine. But my question is then, fine, if you have an issue with all these theories, and if you have an issue with the way that the trajectory of activism is going among young Muslim circles, put forward a theory based on Islamic principles. And until then, keep quiet. I'm sorry, because what you're telling people now, telling people who are facing oppression, don't do anything. That's what you're saying.
It sounds very conservative. It sounds very like the status quo maintains, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds very unfair because people are experiencing racism, experiencing gender violence, experiencing wealth inequality, like on a mad scale. And you're saying that, no, don't do anything. No, like we have, and the thing is, I truly believe Islam has the model though. We have the model of Moses and the Pharaoh. We have that model that existed. We have the model of mutafifin, people who cheat the scales in the marketplace. We have those condemnation from Allah. We have the condemnation from usury. We have the condemnation. Every pillar of Islam every pillar of Islam has a socialist aspect to it. From the Shahada to Hajj. Islam is a communal religion. Islam is only understood through the nexus of community. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is all about the individual. So again, my point is that fair enough. I hear your concern. I hear the concerns of the scholars who have issues with feminism, have issues with Marxism and all these things, but just put forward a critique of your own that's sufficient. And people and then push that as the Muslim version of how we're going to do social justice issues.
Yeah, no, I hear that loud and clear, because I've noticed because of social media, the rise of Muslim influencers and whether hijabi influencers or what I would call like Muslim motivational speakers, they're not shuyukh, they're not ulama, but they just talking to the issues that the young people that find pivotal, and they give an answer. And then there's many people that, many more let's say formally educated in the Islamic sciences that would say haram, but apart from the fatwa about what they're saying is haram, you ain't really said what the right answer is. So that's why you look on the influencers videos and it'll be like 100,000 hits in a few days, and then you look at the sheikh's video, it's like, okay, 10,000. It's quite a disparity between the level of influence or interest that is kind of like leveled. So I think that's social media has changed the game. It's a kind of sign of the times.
I think as well, it's not really helpful. Like again, people, I think such a shame. We have such a rich tradition of scholarship, and like I think about it, those who know Aqidah, those study Aqidah. We took that from the Greeks. Like Ghazali, as beautiful and amazing as he was, he took a lot of his methodology from Aristotle. Like this whole thing of how we prove the existence of God, God being, God having pre-eternity, his oneness, all these things, and the opposite being untrue for God. He can't have fana. God has to be baqa, he has to be everlasting. These things were taken from before and we adopted it, so it's not a problem. So my thing is, let's say we have critical race theory today, or feminism today. Take those principles and say, okay, this is what we can allow in Islam, and this is what we can't allow. That's it. Rather than say it's haram and it's kufr.
And I just want to even just quickly respond to that, because, and I think it's really, really true. I think, however, probably what I would say is that in previous times, there was a basic foundation understanding of deen that you had, like you said, I know what you studied, I know your background, so you can read Marx and it not trip you out. You can read, I'm saying all these different things, whereas unfortunately, many people in our tradition, in our society, and if we're looking at the Black Muslim framework or the Western Muslim framework, the foundation isn't even there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so I think what's problematic is when they're going out into the world, then there's no roots. So they're becoming like lost leaves, you know what I'm saying? And not like, for example, I can look at myself as a woman of faith. I'm currently doing a course on female mystics, right? From the Hindu tradition, from the Christian tradition, from the Jewish, my faith does not shake because I'm rooted in what I'm about. Do you understand? So it doesn't affect me reading about someone writing poetry about Krishna. I'm not suddenly gonna, you know what I'm saying, start like losing myself. And I think that a lot of it is to do with the foundation. And I think that's what's kind of missing. We think it's okay, you know, that maybe we might send our kids to like madrasa Sunday schools, and they might even, if they're even paying attention, it might just be on their computer games, it might just be on Insta whilst, you know what I'm saying? And I think unfortunately, and maybe it might also come from the fact that in some of our Muslim communities, it was just the norm to kind of send your children out and know that they would receive that foundation like back home. You send your kids, you know, to the madrasa, your teacher will teach them what they need to know. I feel like in the West, you don't have that luxury. Like you have to be a lot more on point with the ways in which your offspring or your families are grounded in knowledge, because what's coming at us from, you know, whether from the television, from the media, social media, is so powerful that little couple of hours in the madrasa is not enough for your child to have a response to the world, you know what I mean? And I think that's part of the problem. It's like, if I look at, you know, my connection to Senegal, every child, you know, at least in the Medina Bay, in the village that we spend a lot of time in, every child is Hafid the Quran, or if not Hafid the Quran, they've gone through the Quran. They have a basic foundation of fiqh. They have a basic foundation of, you know, aqidah, basic stuff. You know, what some of the young people that come from Mauritania, like one of my friends was telling me that in Mauritania, if you haven't memorized at least like half the Quran, people wonder like, what happened in your childhood? Like, what happened to you? Were you raised with no mother or no parents? Like something must have happened wrong for you to not know basic.
It's not the norm.
It's not the norm, right? So then when you go out, you've got your fiqh, you've got your Quran, you've got your understanding. When you then go out and, like you said, grapple with feminism, you're not looking at it because you're looking for answers. You're actually, you know, looking to, you know, if anything, you have an appetite for knowledge and you're trying to find reflections and what can I take and what makes sense. And, you know, it's a different relationship. And I think you're right. I definitely don't think the answer is for us to be locked away. We're not like monks in a mountain somewhere where we're just going to read our texts and we have no engagement with the world. This is not the Islamic tradition at all. We're supposed to be in the world and actually, in some ways, like the forethinkers, and you know what I'm saying, in high positions in society, because we've got a foundation which unfortunately I think is not there. So
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
kind of, yeah.
I have to acknowledge that both of your last remarks are extremely important and part of a much bigger conversation for the Muslim world. I don't even think the Western world or the Black Muslim people like the Ummah. That's an Ummah question, because I think that's like a global issue that in many different pockets you hear similar themes about people, Muslims struggling with trying to deal with day-to-day issues, societal issues, but not quite sure of the kind of rudimentaries of the ancient tradition, that's how to answer those questions, and sometimes flirting with newer ideas, but maybe for answers, because like I said, thinking that Islam is kind of a safra, but like more, you know, it was for a certain time, but now for weddings, you know, we'll get the shaking because someone's died, you know, the rituals, just for the rituals, the ritualistic, it's Ramadan, you know, but day-to-day queries, I don't know. I think this Jordan Peterson might have some answers, or Mark's had some interesting insights, or, you know, and they're going elsewhere to look for these ideas. But yeah, that could be a spin-off topic in itself. Maybe a couple books for each of you to write in the future, because it's really good PhD. Or anybody else, or topics for anybody else that's watching this to ponder if that could be a dissertation thesis. My last question before I bring in our other participants is, beyond victimhood to visionaries. Mamadou, what does that mean to you when you hear that?
I think it's what we said today. Like, having spaces for healing are important, but that can't be our guiding politic. Trauma cannot guide your politics anymore. And I think that's very problematic, because ultimately we just end up reproducing and reinstating the will. Like, my thing is like, and I'm someone who, like, again, reads the abolitionist theories, is that how do we build healthy communities? Like, how do we have conversations that it's no longer a conversation of, oh, this person called me a bad word when I was 7 years old, or I had a bad experience in this South Asian mosque when I was 10, and that's why I'm traumatized. Yes, we heal from those things, go to therapy for those things, but how do we then build institutions knowing what we know that goes away from like, oh, victimhood of blackness? I'm black, I'm not a victim. Like I feel like the black radical tradition teaches us, like, you know, always be a hope, always be strong. Like we're not in perpetual state of slavehood. The only thing we're slave, the only time we're slaves when we're slave to Allah. We're not a slave to any system or any slave to any type of people, particularly white people or any structures. So when I think of like from victimhood to visionary, I think it's like moving away from centering our personal trauma and our politics to moving forward to building healthier communities.
Wow, nice. Sister Sakina, same exact question. What's your thoughts beyond victimhood to visionaries? What do you think of when you hear that phrase?
Super powerful question. I always want to respond to Mamadou before I talk, but I like what you said about this idea of not a perpetual state of slavehood. I did my bachelor's degree in Caribbean studies and literature, so you know, I spent a long time immersed in these kind of conversations really about slavehood and what it means. And one thing that I think is really important, not only not a perpetual state of slavehood, but not an inherent state of slavehood. Because I think this is really a problem when you start to travel, especially sometimes when you go to parts of the Muslim world where they might not have these political dynamics yet. They might not be having these conversations, but you see darker skinned people. There's almost this inherent state almost that they it's like we're inherently lower than the lighter skinned people. And I think, you know, for those of us who come from a Western colonial experience or a Western enslavement experience, yeah, there's problems, but at least from a Jamaican perspective, it was very clear who the enemy was, right? In comparison to, for example, how the Portuguese and Spanish colonized and enslaved, they mixed in and created this kind of mixed race kind of structure. So you fit somewhere different.
Like a caste system almost.
But it was very complex, right? Like if you were quarter black and 3/4 white, if you were half Indian, half black, it was a whole system. It's very interesting. Whereas in Jamaica and the Caribbean, they weren't really trying to mix with us that much. There was a mild class of like light-skinned people, but for the most part, we knew who the enemy was. So there was never this idea really, from what I've kind of ascertained from our literature, that like there was never this idea that we kind of didn't know what we were up against in some cases. And I think that there's something about that gives you a sense of self. Like I might be oppressed, but I'm not them. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to be them. I know who they are. Like that, don't get me wrong, it's much more nuanced than that. But I think, again, we're looking at the kind of resistance culture that we had in Jamaica, particularly the maroon culture and the ways in which we resisted, it was very clear who our enemy was. And so yeah, I guess there was just something about not internalizing the state of slavehood that is quite important. Moving forward, I think the key is in the word movement, right? It's moving, because I think that what's happened and what happens is we get stuck on the journey, right? We get stuck on the road. We don't realize that we came from somewhere and we're on our way back to somewhere. And I'm not just talking about geographically, but I'm saying we come from dignity, and we've been undignified by an undignified people, because actually racism isn't my problem, it's your problem. Do you understand? If you think it's normal to dehumanize a human, you got the problem, not me. Do you understand? So I think we are on a journey, and I think sometimes, and this is my experience again coming from that 80s Black community, is that we build identities based on trauma, like Mamadou said, right? We've got our identities. So sometimes the question might even lend itself, what would we even do with liberation? Would we even know how to be free? So I feel like the point is understanding that we're on a journey. It's a movement, but we have to keep going. We can't stop. You know what I'm saying? If we come upon a particular issue like what Mamadou's saying about in his generation, his circles, we're coming upon, which is kind of come up quite a lot in what you said, we cannot fuse trauma and politics. Understand maybe that your trauma galvanized you towards politics. Keep it moving. Keep going. You need some therapy, go get some therapy. If you need to go back to Africa, go spend some time with the elders, even if you don't know where your ancestors come from, find some elders and sit at their feet. If whatever you need to keep you moving, like keep moving. And I think, Yes. Someone call
No,
me.
keep going. No, keep going, sis.
Oh.
We're gonna cut your wisdom. We're gonna cut your wisdom. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, keep going. Even from another angle, like I was speaking to my mum and my dad about this, and I said to them, I'm a result of their evolution. That how much knowledge of self they acquired as young people in the 70s, 80s, come joining the Rasta movement, reading Malcolm X. That I was born on top of that. I didn't know nothing but this growing up. So it means that I have a certain foundation to build upon. I was saying to my mum, I want to do a PhD, not because I know what I want to study, but also because I can. And then what do my children have to build upon? Do you understand? Like, you have to keep going. That's my point. So moving from victimhood to what was it? Move from victimhood to visionaries. For me, it's about movement. Don't stop. If Allah gives you opportunity to increase your knowledge, go get more knowledge. If Allah gives you an opportunity to increase your wealth, up your wealth. So your children aren't being born having to, like, in survival mode. You know what I'm saying? Trying to just, you can't even have a spiritual or an academic experience because you don't even know where food is coming from. Like, keep moving, you know what I'm saying? And I think that for me is how, one of the ways in which we can get out of that state of victimhood.
Alhamdulillah. I like what you said when you said, are we ready for liberation, or what would we do with freedom? Because I always just think about when I would spend time with my Pan-Africanist family that are not Muslim, that's in the mainstream Black community. And sometimes we would have these debates and Islam and Arab, and, you know, we'd have these different conversations going backward and forth, and we're learning from each other. But I would always come back to that question, or that question would always rise, is that what would we do if white people left the UK and said, we're leaving by tomorrow? Yeah, here's the keys, here's electricity key, and here's the key for the door. We are off. What system would you use? What system would you put in place to implement in terms of law, codes? How would you import, export, run your economy? And we said, at least as Muslims, we have that continuous framework. And, you know, it's an ongoing conversation, but it's when you mentioned that, sister, it kind of reignited that thought in my mind. I want to thank you both, but please don't go yet, because we're going to touch you just a little bit more, just to get some interaction from the rest of the brothers and sisters in the chat. Just giving them time to formulate their questions. If anybody wants to put a question in the chat, I'm happy to read it out, but we really would, even if you don't want to switch your camera on, switch your mic on, and feel free to make a comment, a question, and hopefully not a criticism, but, you know, we can tolerate that. I think we're big enough for that, if anybody has any kind of feedback. So if you want to raise your hand, so that I can just call you out to unlock your mic, that would be helpful. But if not, I may have to keep questions coming, because I've still got more.
I think,
so
I think Conscious One unmuted his mic.
Oh, Conscious One, yeah. So Conscious One, you look like I'm taking it that you want to ask a question. So I'm gonna hand the mic to you, sir, or sister, should I say? I'm gonna hand the mic to yourself.
So I couldn't find the option in order to raise my hand. So
I know that voice. Go ahead, brother.
Ahmed James, you all
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brother.
Walaikum salam, brothers and sisters. Alhamdulillah, it was a really beautiful talk, because I liked the approaches that you both had. You know, you kind of rounded off on the topic from a spiritual perspective and also from a political as well. So it was really beautiful to hear two young individuals exposing so much knowledge within themselves, and, you know, sharing their culture and their knowledge with us. So alhamdulillah, thank you for that hearing that. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions actually, but I'll just start with one and then see if anybody else wants to jump in, and then I may come back. So granted that both of you guys have got such rich, strong cultural bases, you know, that would enable your confidences to where you are. However, there are many men, there are many women, really, that don't identify with a strong male role model, as some of them may have come from African Caribbean families who that male may have a colonial mindset, if you will. So therefore, it doesn't give them that opportunity in order to recognize the importance of the community, if you will. So in terms of that, it has a knock-on effect in terms of that woman seeking that male, in terms of that role model, in terms of a husband and what they look for. So the sister is Sakina then, in that situation, unfortunately, there is some lack of role models that are coming from a sort of Black cultural perspective. Where does that leave some of the sisters, and can we blame them for making those difficult choices in that mindful of looking for a husband?
That's a really, really good question, actually. And first of all, just in response to the last bit of the question, 100% there can be no blame, you know.
Mhm.
However, I definitely think, you know, like if I look at my background, I was obviously not born Muslim. So, you know, for sure, you know, similarly how Momadou was talking about the kind of females that were presented as attractive or what have you, and the light-skinned girl, for us, where I come from, like coming from the hood, like we were only interested in the most hoodist of guys, you know what I'm saying? The ones that had been engaged in all kinds of criminality. But I guess there comes a point, doesn't there, in someone's life when they understand, or we would hope they come to understand their sense of worthiness. And I think there is a big conversation on social media and a lot of these platforms about this idea of self-care and what that really means, not just bubble bath and candles and chocolates and stuff like that, but really, right, really honoring who you are and giving yourself your rights, giving yourself your boundaries, understanding what's acceptable and what isn't. And you're right, sometimes you won't learn that in house. You may not learn that in your home, you might not learn that in your community. I was recently in a class with an elder African-American woman, and she was talking about her experience with the shayukh, the African shayukh in Senegal, and she was crying and she was saying, we never had male role models we could look up to as black women. We didn't have black men we could look up to and show us what an honorable man looks like, you know. And so she was kind of saying for her, she found that in that community. And so you're right, it's not everyone is going to have that, but I guess it's just important that before that, women recognize and start working on their own selves. You know, how do I want to be treated? What kind of world do I want to create for my daughters, for example, that they are treated in a way that is honorable? So I always think about it like Allah honored the children of Adam. Do you understand? If Allah honored me, then I'm inherently a dignified human being. I've learned lack of dignity outside, but that state is part of my fitra. So it is, again, and as Muslims, we're constantly working on ourselves, aren't we? And looking at ourselves. So I think it's really about remembering that, like, shaitan is the one who likes to see us dishonored. So even sometimes when I look at, you know, different images of our community and different ways in which I see Black people expressing themselves, sometimes I wonder, like, what role shaitan is playing in us constantly not being dignified in how we express ourselves, you know what I'm saying? And so that's kind of my contemplation that I think about. I'm like, where did we learn this? You know, because even when looking from a Caribbean perspective, when we were one generation out of slavery, we were dignified. You know what I'm saying? You think about our grandparents or great-great-grandparents, they were dignified people. They were, you know, striving in godliness. They were married. They were trying to establish a family structure. They were striving to kind of establish their communities. And what happened? What happened to us? And I think a lot of what happened to us is us coming to the West, you know what I'm saying, and wanting so much to be accepted that we lost ourselves and we lost our dignity. So that's my reflection on it.
Interesting that you say that, sister, because I think about the same thing with the elders that came on a Windrush, when people talk about, oh, you know, Black men and being fathers and being providers and protectors. It must be to do with our genes and, you know, epigenetics. It's in the genes because of slavery. And I'm saying, so what about Granddad that came on the Windrush? Them guys dressed sharp. They was up early on a Sunday shining their shoes. They were very thing about keeping your fingernails clean, not eating with a hat at the dinner table. And they were very meticulous about manners and how you address people and things of that nature. All about huluk, all about character. So if his grandson is wearing his jeans and exposing certain parts of his work, or just the language and the energy and the frequency is undignified, like you said, we know it's from the devil and from not because the people are bad, but they've been misled. We need another answer, but we can't go with the epigenetics because Granddad is two generations a bit closer to the plantation, and he didn't work it like that. So we need to go back to the drawing board if we're looking for answers. I think it might be something to do with cultural continuity when you move from one place, culture, you know, like a kind of displacement. You know, coming to the Western world, it takes something out of you to kind of maintain your structures. So, well, that's a little bit of food for thought. Brother Ahmed, do you want to come back in and extend on that question at all?
No, it's good to hear that. I'd like to hear Mamadou's perspective, as someone that's seen as you've dropped in there as well. So I'd like to hear Mamadou's perspective on that.
I don't know. I'm as a cop out, but I genuinely feel like Sakina said it all.
Okay.
I guess my only kind of. I think a lot of Black people in the UK, we suffer from aspirational whiteness. that we aspire, and I feel that's when, and this is again, I'm always going to lean on my leftist thinking, but again, I think even the notion of Black community is actually a myth. And even the notion of this kind of homogenous Black Muslim community, it's a myth. We don't have, we have a Black Muslim experience maybe we can tap into, but ultimately we are divided by our interests. We are divided by our material interests more than anything. The West African, that's why I feel like, this is why I think in terms of how I'm doing politics now, I'm trying to move away from the Black nationalism kind of politics where it's just Black centered, because in the UK, and a bit of topic, but I want to just throw it in there. What do we do in the UK where we have Caribbean boys are more likely to be treated the same in school as Bengali and Pakistani boys? When we have West African boys who are different, children of West African immigrants far outdo Caribbean boys in school. So we can't have a Black only politic in this situation. We have to be looking forward to how do we, manage our politics in this arena, because it's not a Black only thing here. And so I kind of feel like when, as a community, again, we suffer from aspirational whiteness, I think, and we actually are more divided by our interests materially than anything else. Sorry to go on tangent, Ahmed. I hope you're well, bro.
No.
Thanks for inviting me.
I'm good, man. It's always a pleasure to hear you, man. It's always a pleasure.
Right.
So go on.
Go on, brother. Go on, beloved.
Is there another question I could ask?
For sure.
Okay. So I know that you guys had mentioned like healthy communities and centers of learning, and I think it's incredibly important to have that. And I know that Mamadou has also been reading alongside myself some of the work of Bell Hooks, and Bell Hooks talks about this teaching to transgress from what we've experienced in our lives and how we can go to a healthier communities as well, and within a patriarchal society. But do we have any models of what that society would look like? And do we have any suggestions of a plan? Because we are good at highlighting the issues. We're really good at that, but we don't have anything concrete. So one is a plan, and do we have a sort of template that we could model that on in the UK or Islamically, Africa, whatever it is, wherever you want to take it from? What could we replicate in the UK? To both of you.
Yeah, Sakina, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. I'll go first because I don't have too much to say really on the matter, but it's definitely a big one. And I think again, it kind of links to what my point is about movement. Like, we can talk about these things, but let's move forward. Let's create a plan. I'm very, very aware of the privilege that I have of being connected to a West African tradition, particularly as someone of West African heritage, you know what I'm saying? And I think that even though when I joined that community, I didn't join it because I was necessarily looking for an African Islamic framework, but I know that I've settled there because there's something familiar in my DNA about experiencing Islam in that framework, you know what I'm saying? But what I will say about that, and it's not a tariqa thing or you need to be part of a particular community, but what I've seen with the African American Muslim experience is that when they came upon this community, whether they joined the shayukh, whether they took bay'ah or not, they recognized there was a framework and they connected to it straight away. So whether they were Tijani or not, they would send their kids there to learn Quran. They would send their kids there to learn Arabic. They would send their kids there to experience this model. And there's actually a sister who's doing her PhD, but her focus was on the educational system that existed in that framework. And why was it that so many African Americans, like in their hundreds, probably maybe thousands over the years, connected to a framework that was able to kind of give them an Islamic identity. So many of them learned Wolof, for example, which is the language in Senegal. And many of their kids, even whether they became a Hafiz of Quran or not, they learned how to read Arabic there. And so, as well as they lived Islam in Africa, which I think for me is my connection, it's the lived experience. What happens when I, as a Black Muslim woman, what happens to me in that space? And the first thing that happens to me in that space is that I can be, like Mamadou said a bit earlier, I can be. Like, I don't need to think about my Blackness or my womanness or my Muslimness. I can just breathe and exhale. And there's something about that in your Muslim experience coming from the West that is important. So I would say, first of all, the same way you have people going to, obviously times are different travel-wise, but there was a time where lots of people were going to Syria, they were, mashallah, going to Egypt, to these different places. seek out these spaces, see if you can. Not that you need to go there to get your deen from there, but just to experience a different framework. Like I found out when I did my DNA test that most of my African DNA comes from Mali. This is a rich Islamic Muslim tradition. Whether I get to go back there or not, in me, I'm like, I'm the daughter of Mansa Musa. Don't worry about me. I'm good. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's how I'm talking to myself. I come from there, and that gave me a certain sense of self. However, moving forward, I have also heard my teacher say to that African American Muslim community, now that you've got imams, now that you've got Hufaz Quran, establish yourself in America now. So your kids don't need to keep being sent to Africa and you're disrupting the family structure for like sometimes 7, 8, 9 years. Set up, you know what I mean? And so I think it is important that we learn from these traditions and work towards establishing them here. The British community of people connected to that, the West African tradition, we're a new community. We're probably about 11 years deep as Black British members of this community. So there's a lot more work to do. But I think my first one would be, I would say, connect to somewhere Islamically or Islamic traditions that have some connection to you in some kind of way. You know what I mean? Don't look for validation outside of your tradition. Like my shayukh, they all went to Al-Azhar, but their grandfather, who was the founder of their village, said, I'm only sending you there for the certification, because we live in a time where having a certificate means something, but what you're going to learn in Al-Azhar is nothing that we can't teach you here. You know what I'm saying? And so they have that richness of tradition. Their shayukh are their fathers or their grandfathers, and it's very powerful to be, I see myself as a spiritual inheritor or a spiritual part of this tradition. These are my spiritual ancestors. I go to their villages, even in the middle of nowhere, because I'm like, what I receive comes by way of you people. You know what I'm saying? And that gives me a sense of self that I also use with the women that I work with in the UK. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but it's, I guess, something that I do think about.
MashaAllah, it took me on a journey there. Beautiful.
Yeah, man, I could smell the food. I could see the goats running in the village, everything. Man. I was there for a bit. I was there. That was some serious NLP, man. That was deep. That was deep. That was deep. Mamadou, let me not stop you from jumping in.
No, I think, again, Sakina, you said it all, and I'm totally in agreement with you. I think ultimately, when we're talking about structuring communities and societies, we have to recognize, as Sakina quoted the verse, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, like Allah says we have ennobled Adam. Allah didn't say we have ennobled Muslims. Allah didn't say we have ennobled men. Allah didn't say we have ennobled Black people or white people. Allah says, by virtue of a human being, you are ennobled by God. And I think that's the starting point I go into any political organization I do. As for a framework, I like the fact that if you look at some pre-colonial societies, and again, I don't want to romanticize pre-colonial Africa. There was terrible things that happened, took place there. But we do have a framework that taught us that hierarchy doesn't have to be on gender, for example. So we have some societies in West Africa where hierarchy wasn't by gender, hierarchy was actually by age. If you were older, you were more respected in society, whether that's a man or a woman, for example. Hierarchy wasn't denoting society by how much possession you have, which is the capitalist logic. That, you know, you're only valued in society by how much wealth you can output and how much wealth you can import. So I kind of feel like, I think we have frameworks there. I don't know how, I'm not saying we have to hark back, but I feel like I think that people have a question as well, oh, but isn't Islam inherently hierarchical? And I feel like, no, I feel like we can recognize difference in societies. For example, if Sakina's a poet and I'm a doctor, when someone's sick, I'm better in that moment because I'm a doctor in that moment. Doesn't mean I'm better always. Sakina might be better than me in some things as well. So I think we can recognize difference in society without establishing a hierarchy around those differences or attaching intrinsic value to the differences, because ultimately, by virtue of human being, you are ennobled by God. So I feel like that pushing that narrative, I think it does help when we kind of restructure society.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, guys. I think that is fantastic. And I want just an adage to that. Would you both be willing to be part of something that we are trying to create in order to establish those plans that you've mentioned?
I would. I'm down for it.
I'm so I you know me, I'm one of them people that I get so gassed, like, yeah, I want to be and then when the reality comes, I'm like, I'm so sorry, but 100% I'd be happy to be part of anything really. And it's interesting because as we were speaking, I was like, man, we should try and organize things to kind of bring people from the African diaspora, particularly those who are disconnected from Africa, to Islamic Africa. You know what I'm saying? Because like I remember when I embraced Islam, it was a time when Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick was giving lots of talks in England. And so he was talking constantly about Islam in Africa, Islam in the Caribbean. So we came into that kind of framework. And again, we just had a certain confidence. And there was one brother, and he always used to say, he comes from like a kind of nation background. His name's, I can't remember his name, Rashad, I think. And he was all from Brixton. He'd say, I came to Islam through the black door, not the back door. You know what I'm saying? Because I came to Islam through the black door, not the back door, meaning that I came with knowledge of self into this situation. I didn't come as a slave, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's quite important that we understand that. For some people like myself, I feel like I had gone through, I'm still going through, but this knowledge of self as a black person. So when I came into Islam, I made a dua before I took my shahada. I was like, Allah, I'm not looking for friends amongst these people. I'm just looking for you. Like, I'm not here to join anyone's community. I'm literally here for your face, you know? Whereas a lot of members of our community don't have that. So there's a double thing happening, which is knowledge of self, and then is also kind of our ethnicity, and then also the deen. But I think there's definitely a space for that, you know, of facilitating the way for people from the African community to experience Islam, whether it be in Senegal, in Mali, in Nigeria. I really want to go to Nigeria. I know you went, Mamadou. You guys went to Nigeria, right? I'm desperate to go to Kano to see this Islamic royalty that exists in the royal palaces, and this kind of intersection of spirituality and royalty. You know, Ghana, like, there's so much, and I think these things are, even if you just get to taste it for 5 minutes, you come back when you go to the mosque and someone's looking down at you, you just have a different way, because you're like, you don't even know, like, my people, like, you don't even know like what establishments we've got, you know. So it was just a thought really that we should try and facilitate these types of things.
Alhamdulillah. Ahmed, thanks for answering that question. Thanks for remembering to answer that question. And we shall, you are on record, so we will be holding you to that, both of you to that, but with great pleasure. And only because of time, we're going to have to wind down. But I really want to thank you both for spending your Sunday afternoon with us at BBIB. And I think that it's been sensational. And the fact that we recorded this for future posterity and those that wasn't able to jump into the live, that they can see this, because I think one of the things that's come out of this conversation, and striking messages is moving from victimhood to visionaries, and that you spoke about that was throughout the tapestry of the conversation, and it maybe had something to do with your emergence into Islam, or emergence from the Islamic backgrounds that you come from, that there was that sense of empowerment, that sense of identity. Because I think that a lot of Black Muslims, I return to that problematic word, but you know what I mean. A lot of Black Muslims in the diaspora, there is maybe an identity crisis before entering in the religion, or brought up with some complexities and complexes about race, or about identity, and about inferiority and things of that nature. So I think these are really important things that we have to continue to speak to address, to try and create those spaces where our people can heal. And as I mentioned, our people can heal. I just want to make one announcement before I finish off, and that is that we have created a Muslim safe space for the month of Ramadan. It will be beginning on the 17th of April. The time will be 6 o'clock. It's a 45-minute Zoom. Poster will be coming out with a link, hopefully by tomorrow. But essentially, it's psychological well-being and lockdown. So just everybody can keep themselves in this. It's a non-judgmental space. It will be facilitated by mental health trainers, psychotherapists, and it is, like I said, a non-judgmental safe space. People will have their cameras off. They can have pseudonyms on the screen, so if they need to speak freely and self-disclose, but it's not a replacement for therapy. And we will be giving like references for places you can go to if you need any help with actual mental health. But it's just a Muslim safe space where people can kind of like debrief or offload. And we're going to start that off for the month of Ramadan. So just wanted to mention that. And to thank all of you who made this afternoon your priority. This was decreed by Allah, and I feel like I feel honored to be a part of it. So, and if there's any last words anybody would like to say, but that's, as they say, that's it from me.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, my brother.
Sakina, we're going to have to catch up soon again, inshallah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Take care,
Even
brothers.
more there. Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Take care. Nice speaking with you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
Take care.
Barakallah.